In the 13 years of Minecraft's existence, this game has racked up a plethora of magic mods, featuring hours upon hours of content and a boatload of achievements. I often feel like everyone has that one magic mod they gravitate towards, whether it's Botania, Apotheosis, Blood Magic, you name it. But I wondered if I could challenge myself to create a playthrough where I mastered every magic mod this game had to offer, discovering their quirks, their secrets, their dangers. And so I conjured up a world and prepared to quite literally fall into this realm of magic. This, dear viewer, is where our journey begins. Welcome to Mastering Magic. Chapter 1: Discovering the Magic of a Home. But before we get into it, I need to gush about today's sponsor, Life Makeover. Life Makeover is simply a dress-up and social simulation game, where you can customize your avatar, build your dream home, and connect with your friends. They are constantly running events and adding new stuff, and they have just released a collaboration with Sanrio, featuring clothing inspired off Sanrio characters. To celebrate, I got to visit this amazing Sanrio-inspired player home. It really shows off the creativity you can display with their home building system. You can get started for free on Steam, Google Play, or the App Store, and just to make it extra easy, I'll leave a link in the description below. Thank you so much, Life Makeover, for sponsoring this video, and now we return to the magic. I emerged from the ground at the top of a hill in a land unknown to me. The world was caked in red clay pools with water and coniferous trees. The sun sat in the middle of the sky, warning my time before dark was already limited. As much as I wanted to jump into the magic that emanated from this land, I had to focus on my own survival. So I started foraging for food, already coming across a magical berry I'd never seen. There were flowers that shimmered in the light with mystical properties that I couldn't resist picking. As I ventured, I spotted a few sheep, but since I preferred to shear them over ending them, I would have to wait for a bed. Before the sun completely set, I collected spruce wood and ventured into a nearby cave. I had no bed, and there wasn't much else to do other than craft a pickaxe and travel further underground. The cave was lush and brimming with a life that put me at ease. I managed to find silver, iron, and coal before the sun emerged. And with my newfound iron, I quickly crafted some shears and left the cave. Unfortunately though, the sun didn't offer safety. Two skeletons emerged, and well, at first I thought I probably couldn't handle this. They started fighting each other. I took the opportunity and cleaned up the battle, and once I was done, I noticed a new chainmail had appeared in my inventory, dropped from one of the skeletons. I scoured the landscape in search of sheep so that I could craft myself a bed. Eventually, I found two sheep, one black, one white, but luckily, thanks to the nearby squid, I was able to dye the wool and finally craft a sleeping bag. Immediately, I knew my next goal was going to be acquiring a backpack. However, before I could start searching for the supplies, a wooden tower in the distance caught my eye. The tower was clearly connected to Apotheosis, containing gems and other items from the mod, and some diamonds, just enough for a pickaxe. I decided this was a good place to sleep and to store what I needed until I could secure a backpack. When I awoke, I continued my search for leather, and it was a barren one. I gathered some extra mystical flowers on the way, but there was not a cow in sight. I did, however, find a lovely birch biome on the other side of the lake, and I decided this is where I'd like to settle down for my adventures. And instead of focusing on a backpack, I focused on bringing my belongings over there. Now, it was just a matter of establishing myself and creating a safe place to practice magic. I cleared the area of trees and then explored the nearby cave. It was steep and brimming with monsters, so I decided that I'd prefer to create a straight shot down with ladders. This, of course, breaks one of Minecraft's core rules that you should never dig straight down. But what can I say, I'm a bit of a rule breaker. It became a tedious process of clinging to a ladder while breaking the blocks below. A few times I broke into a cavern and used water to keep myself afloat while I bridged my ladder down. Before I went any further though, I made myself some iron armor just to protect myself from any other dangers in the cave. While I was not playing in hardcore, I was bent on not dying. Eventually, my ladder reached the -50s and I was greeted by a wide, broiling lava river. Luckily, I brought a bucket of water, so it was really just a matter of turning the lava into obsidian so I could walk along the shore. I found some more diamonds and other goodies, but I was hesitant to mine them because I was hoping to get a fortune enchantment first. Many magical mods require diamonds and other ores to practice, so I was going to need to maximize how many I got from each vein. While it's traveling along the river, I spotted a spawner and immediately destroyed it because I don't want to deal with that, and I was greeted by a chest containing some more diamonds and 2 enchantment tables? Perfect. I also came across a small underground camp, presumably left by a previous miner, but as I approached the chest to loot it, it bared its teeth and tried to attack me. This thing had a whopping 60 hearts and was unbelievably hostile. But as I slayed it, it dropped some night vision goggles, which was going to be very helpful for my mining endeavors. A myriad of dungeons and caves alike sprouted from this lava river, but one in particular held a boss dubbed Stefan the Non-Suspicious. Feeling rather confident, I took him head on. Upon his death, he dropped a rather special pair of boots. By now though, my inventory was very full, so I had to head back up and do a few trips to get all the goodies from Stefan's dungeon. Finally, it was time to create that lovely diamond enchanted pickaxe I envisioned. When I placed the enchanting table though, I was greeted with a system I was unfamiliar with. 3 factors now affected my enchanting: Eterna, Quanta, and Arcana. Eterna, like the enchanting I knew, was given by bookshelves and other similar items. In order to create bookshelves, I crafted canvas and paper using bark and straw from the Farmer's Delight mod. I was very excited because I remembered a single tip I was given that you could get straw from cutting grass with a knife, and it made this whole process so much easier. Eventually, I had 15 bookcases, and unsure of how the other 2 factors work, I made some candles that apparently added Arcana to my setup. Finally, I was ready to enchant, except there was one issue. I had very little levels. I thought perhaps if I explored and searched for mobs, that would be a good way to get a gain on my levels. My map showed a dungeon nearby, and I decided to peek at it. However, I realized that it probably would be a lot of loot that I didn't have the inventory space for, and I once again realized that I really needed to make a backpack before I went exploring. So I did exactly that, killing any cows I found with my knife since they dropped leather at a higher rate. And after all that, I still decided to go mining for the remaining levels I needed. The truth was, I was in a very unfamiliar place with mechanics and magic I clearly didn't understand. I wasn't exactly sure what threats laid further out, and I wanted to be sure I was strong enough before I even learned. I continued to mine for some time, going back to upgrade my backpack when I could. Eventually, I found a large infestation of skulk, which was actually great news considering it was a steadfast way of gaining levels. I harvested it until I hit level 30, and then I was on my merry way up to enchant my pick. Except I got distracted along the way, finding another dungeon and meeting a very sweet goblin trader. But I did go to the surface to enchant my pickaxe, even crafting a fresh new one. And then I foolishly forgot a very important component: the lapis. So it was back down to the mines, and at this point I should have just lived down there. This time, instead of staying in the lava river, I branched off to one of the nearby caves that was higher in elevation. This lush cave contained an interesting array of spots, including a camp, a geode, and a whole cabin, which contained a documentation of other cave biomes that I could potentially encounter. It was also in this cabin I found this diamond halberd with a looting 3 enchantment, which you'll notice I grow quite attached to. Not far from the cabin, I acquired my lapis, but by this point I was already here and I wanted to look around. I explored, filling up my backpack with goodies and fighting monsters, but soon enough I returned to the surface to finally enchant my pick. And on my first try, I did not get fortune. I had like a boo. No, it's okay though, because at least with the skulk I had a fast and efficient way of gaining levels, so it was just a matter of trying again. After a few attempts, I rolled Fortune 2, which was good enough for me. And I combined some of the extra pickaxes to get a lovely enchanted one completed with Vein Miner, Unbreaking, Fortune, and Smelter. And finally, I could go mine all the veins I had set aside to be mined once I had Fortune. I started in my lava river first, mining exposed ores before switching to the lush cave where I found all kinds of goods and more structures. A few times I found exposed crying obsidian hiding spawners and other chests, and at one point I came across another mimic that I killed with much more ease, and it offered me a heart crystal that granted me 5 extra hearts. However, as I neared the end of my mining trip, I came across a strange icy cave. Bones and piles of silver were discarded about the area, and to my horror, in the center of it all rested a sleeping dragon. It frightened me, and without any hesitation, I ran back to the surface, fearing I could wake it up. It occurred to me now the things I needed to establish before I started my journey of mastering the magical arts, and that was safety and the ability to feed myself. To start with food, I created a pen, luring sheep and cows into it so I could start a mini farm. I brought water up from the lake and slaughtered salmon for extra food. My chests also grew increasingly full from the loot of my adventures, so I sought to create upgraded chests. I established a small wheat farm first, then built some botany pots to grow other crops such as potatoes and carrots. Small side note, for some reason the interior of the botany pot was not rendering, so it looked completely empty, which I found a bit odd, but you can see at the top it has seeds. With my food supply now steady, I had to tackle the one overlooming issue of my safety, or should I say 3. You see, on my map sat 3 icy clusters that had no other explanation other than a dragon's nest. These dragons were most likely smaller than the one I discovered sleeping in the cave, but that didn't make them any less destructive or dangerous. I decided that first I would take out the one closest to me, and in preparation I enchanted a bow and crafted as many arrows as I could. In the dead of night, I snuck over, hoping to catch it asleep, but instead it was already rampaging through the woods, destroying any nearby foliage. Immediately, I set out to shoot it, and it shot right back. Its icy breath created these sharp spikes that slowed and harmed me, giving the dragon ample time to close the gap between us. Immediately, I decided the best way to fight this guy was going to be to keep as much distance as possible and shoot him from a long range. The dragon circled me. I kept a pattern of luring him to one area and sprinting to the other, taking every opportunity I could to shoot my bow. But eventually, my arrows dwindled, and I had no choice but to face him head on. Fortunately, he was incredibly low, and with a few amateur hits, the dragon was felled, and I received the achievement Dragon Slayer. I won't lie though, I felt a bit sad. As I looted the dragon in its nest, this aching guilt set in. Wild dragons cannot be tamed and are incredibly hostile, but still, I wish there was something else that could have been done. With my new levels, I upgraded my pick and continued to mine, hoping to distract myself from overthinking about a dragon. A clouded mind, however, never makes for a sharp one. As I was exploring, I came across another camp with a chest rigged with TNT, and once that explosion set off, I couldn't help but feel the immediate shift in the atmosphere. The large, sleeping dragon I tried so hard to avoid was now awake. The cave very quickly started to fall apart, and my usual way of getting back to the ladder was now blocked by a stage 4 dragon. In order to escape, I had to tunnel back to the lava river and climb to safety. But the question remained, was I really safe? Below me, in the very place I planned to build a home, was a large dragon clawing its way through the rocks and dirt in order to most likely kill me. So that left me with the task of, for the second time, slaying a dragon. I once again gathered more arrows, food, and made sure to wear some dragon scale armor, which protected me from attacks, and with much hesitation, I forced myself back down into the mines. When I approached the dragon's nest, the surrounding area had been carved out, the once lush cave now covered with a sheet of ice and water. The dragon had already gone up, and it took me some time to locate her in her newly carved out cave. I shot my first shot, trying to hide against the walls of the cave. If I could lure her out into a more open area, I thought it might be easier to fight. But she was stuck in the very ice that she created. I kept firing my bow, trying to avoid her breath, but there was a certain moment when she was stuck in her own ice, crying out in pain, that I once again felt bad. But this was a matter of survival, so I fired my final shot, ending the dragon's life. You might have noticed I've been referring to the dragon as her. And this I knew because as I looted the dragon's body, I received the achievement Mother of Dragons. And there, sitting in my inventory, was the dragon's egg. The irony of trying to get over a dragon's death and inevitably causing the death of another one was not lost on me, by the way. I decided to take this dragon egg back home with me, keeping it safe until it hatched, and hopefully creating a better fate for the hatchling than those before it. Now though, with the surrounding area much safer, my food supply coming in steady, it was time to start considering a house. Finally, I could indulge in the mundane activities of cutting down trees and clearing land. Of course, with the casual and occasional interruption by apothic mob bosses that definitely didn't almost kill me like 5 times. Anyways, for my house, I decided I wanted something a bit odd, a bit classic, and a bit magical. When it comes to building and survival, I'll admit I'm not the best at it, so I kinda just wanted to skip my starter home phase and build a big beautiful home equipped for my magical adventures. I decided to use this Tudor-styled architecture layout for inspiration. I'll flash it up on screen, but I'll also link it below for anyone who wants to try and use this reference too. For the block palette, I remember seeing some interesting blocks in the lush cave, so I went back down and discovered these layers of crimsite and limestone. I really love the warm white and the red together. It reminded me of a red-capped mushroom, and so I decided to make these two the main blocks in my house. Plus, it matched the references colors as well. When I returned to the surface, I crafted some limestone bricks and got to work on the layout of my house. I wasn't exactly sure how I wanted to translate the building plans into Minecraft and what scale I wanted to use. Ultimately, I think I built it a little bit too big, and by a little I mean a lot, and by a lot I mean you're going to see why this building consumed days of my life. But anyways, I decided I wanted the front to face the beautiful lake in the distance. My idea was that as I expanded my magical studies, I could build down the mountain or even into it. Once I was satisfied with the layout of the house, I realized I was going to need a lot more limestone, so I went back down to the mines with my vein mining pickaxe and started snooping for unexplored caves. Interestingly enough, I found an old underground city, riddled with skulk and giving off the most terrifying of vibes. But there were chests, and at the end of the day, I am just a little guy that loves treasure.
I like money.
I slinked around the ancient city ruins, looting what chests I could and destroying the shriekers so bent on giving me away. However, as I was literally thinking to myself, I wonder how much noise is too much noise, a warden emerged from the skulk and chased me out of the city. I continued to traverse the mines in search of limestone, even going back to the dragon's nest where I grabbed the loot I had forgotten. I came across camps, catacombs, and an old abandoned cabin before I found it. And at one point, I decided to pause my search and return to the surface since I had so much stuff, if I even found limestone, I wasn't going to be able to carry it. To be extra sure that I would be able to grab an abundance of limestone when I returned to the caves, I crafted a stacking upgrade for my backpack, and then went back down. I don't think it's a secret that the shape of this world is very beautiful, but it certainly made some resources rarer than others. I found old mine shafts, structures, and plenty of diamonds before I finally managed to find limestone, and even then it was limited to a thick layer of rock. But it was so pretty, and again, I don't have any regrets about using this in my block palette. Yet. Once I returned to the surface, I could finally continue to build my home. The limestone and the crimsite were both part of the Create mod, and I really liked the different ways you could cut and chisel these blocks. The house plan had space for multiple bedrooms, a parlor, a dining space, which, while I understand it isn't the most necessary in a Minecraft house, I wanted to create a space that felt so much like a home I couldn't possibly feel so isolated in this new magical land I was thrown into all by myself. I'm also a fan of natural light and very large windows, so there's that. For the main walls, I ended up using this sort of cut limestone that reminded me of plaster, which is very similar to what they used in the Tudor style. And so began the great back and forth of materials. Building, trying to figure out exactly what I was doing. This is definitely one of those moments too where I wish I had replay to do a cool time lapse instead of just bouncing around to show you what the house looks like at weird angles. But alas, I didn't choose this world nor the mods, so it is up to me to simply tell you I built really high walls. Oh, and a floor, of course. For the parlor, I went with a very wide spruce plank, and for the entry, I spent a really long time crafting this checkered stone pattern. When it came to the roof, I was unsure of how to approach the reference, and I did go back and end up changing some stuff. What didn't change though was my choice to use crimsite. Somehow I had more of it than I had limestone, but I really loved the red bricks I could make with it. This is also where I will note my large disdain for building roofs in Minecraft, not out of difficulty, but the frustration of placing stair blocks. I spent a very long time building the roof, and the entire time I was trying to decide what I would use for the detail of the side of the house. You see, the reference had these nice wood trims and other decorations that I liked, and felt key to the Tudor aesthetic I was going for, but I couldn't decide if I wanted to use a more available wood like spruce or go with a redwood like mangrove. The downside of doing mangrove was that it would be unfortunately difficult to find. Unless there so happened to be a conveniently located dungeon primarily featuring mangrove wood nearby my home. Yup, I was finally going back to that place, and since I had a big backpack, I didn't have to worry about not being able to take all the loot. With much excitement, I left for the dungeon and arrived ready to fight. I will say this dungeon was really pretty and is a part of the When Dungeons Arise mod, and I just really liked the design. I felt bad knowing I was going to tear it up a bit, but before I could even consider that, I had to clear it out, of course. The dungeon loot featured a great deal of food, some gems from Apotheosis, and some weapons. Once I made my way to the top of the tower, there was a different kind of enemy, these skeletons riding frogs and these phantom-like creatures. I took my time making sure I kept my health up, but surprisingly, it wasn't too much of a task. Initially, I was hoping to find a mangrove sapling when I came here, but I didn't, so I was going to have to settle on the mangrove used to build the dungeon. Before I harvested though, I actually ran back to my house to drop off some stuff and craft an axe with the vein miner enchantment on it. While gathering materials from the dungeon, I grabbed the calcite, quartz, and red nether bricks too, since at this point I was already thinking about using calcite for some extra details. I was having so much fun too, lost in the sauce and really enjoying my music, so I was certainly surprised when I looked up and there was a bloody dragon attacking me. As you know, this wasn't my first rodeo and it came down with ease. I hopped over to its nest, took the loot, and I was on my merry way home with all of the mangrove wood. After a small amount of building, I realized that I was going to need so much more mangrove than what I had collected, so I decided to search for alternatives to acquiring the wood. In my time in this strange land, I found this inferior essence, and from what I could learn, it was something I could use to craft wood seeds, which I could use to grow into wood essence and craft into various wood types. I'd used the mystical agriculture mod before, just not so much in depth, and while I wasn't about to fully dive into it, I thought this might be a practical way to get my footing. I crafted the altar first, made 2 wood seeds, and set them aside to grow. And with this, I felt good enough to commit to my mangrove detailing. While I was up working on the roof though, a mob boss named Motherbrooke the Doctor appeared, which, first of all, mother. Second, she was clad in full netherite gear, and you know I was hoping to get some of it. I slayed her, and at first I thought I just got some lousy loot when I realized she dropped Brooke's quick-minded netherite shimbalds of the 4-leaf clover, which is such a title for a piece of armor. I was giggling. Like, imagine asking someone, hey, I like your armor, and they're like, thanks, it's Brooke's quick-minded netherite shimbalds of the 4-leaf clover. Like, I just don't know. Anyways, I took this opportunity to show off my progress and to get a couple different angles, but this gave me the sudden urge to see what it would look like with the windows completed. I was planning on using Macaw's windows from the start. I was just unsure of what color I wanted to go with. At first, I thought I might do a dark blackstone frame for the windows, but then I promptly decided to do diorite instead. Similar to limestone, the spawning on diorite was limited, so as I delve into the mines, I was once again challenged to find one of these layered rock formations. It did of course also mean I got to run around and fight monsters, loot a few underground camps, and even at one point I found a dungeon. But by the time I found diorite, my inventory was full of loot, so I had to be a bit harsh about my space. When I returned home, I crafted my windows and started on the lower floor, and I was really starting to see why I liked this design. Also, small note, but having a pickaxe with smelter and vein miner on it was probably the best thing since sliced bread, since it meant that I just had to break sand and all of a sudden I had an abundance of glass. I continued to craft and fill in windows on the lower level, and then I was on to thinking about doors. With mods like Macaw's and Chipped, I had plenty of options. I had my classic moment of trying to pick out which glass doors I wanted despite them looking relatively the same, but once I snapped out of my door trance, it was back to working in the house, focusing on the interior. At this point, I wanted to transition to working on both interior and exterior.
What the f is this?
I don't know.
Simultaneously, so I could ensure harmony between the details of the two. For the main entrance and kitchen, I kept that checkered stone pattern, but then the entire upstairs, I just went with classic spruce planks. They're really my favorite, and I think even in modded Minecraft, I can't help but gravitate towards spruce. I did end up taking a break and going back down to the mines to grab moss from the lush cave. In my head, I was thinking of an overgrown look similar to the cottage from Kiki's delivery service, and I thought the green moss would make a nice contrast to the red roof. Since I was up there, I also made a couple changes. Certain shapes of the roof just weren't sitting right with me. I will say I do really enjoy the outcome of this build, and though I feel it isn't final, my guess is as I continue on my magical endeavors, my house will grow with me. Once it was near basic completion, I focused on blending it into the surrounding landscape. In some areas this meant smoothing it out, and in others it meant creating these high steps for future gardens. Now all I had to do was actually move into my new house. But here is where I had a dilemma. I had created this beautiful home with ample space, but I wasn't sure how to utilize it. At first, I thought about using the large attic as a storage space, but as I was hauling my chest upstairs, I realized this was kind of a trek. So I decided to be a classic Sniff-Snifferish move to create a basement for my storage, as I usually do. No one questions why I do this, but I'm gonna give you an answer anyways. I want my chest room to be able to expand if I need it to, and that is why I love underground infrastructure in this game. I could make a 100 block deep basement, and it would still be a basement. I went through the trouble of using smooth stone since it already matched my pre-existing block palette, and moved my chest as soon as I could. I had a lot to sort, but before I got started, I decided to finally take out that dragon egg. As I guided it into the pool of water, it froze and shook, which had me mesmerized. I didn't want to leave this thing until it hatched, so I spent a good time preparing to sort my chest and just hanging around the egg. As I crafted a diamond chest, a noise cracked from behind me. Oh my god. and to my surprise, the dragon egg had already hatched, revealing an adorable white dragon. I was so shook I could not get over how lovable this guy was. And after everything I had gone through at this point, I greeted the company with joy. For the first time since crawling out of that mushroom ring, I felt hopeful about my survival here. Not only had I built a magical estate, but now I had secured the safety to master the different magics of this world. To celebrate, I brought my new friend outside, and together we watched the sunrise upon the lake, happy to have each other and ready to embrace the journey ahead.